Hello everyone and welcome. A really big thank you to you all for being here. My name is Deepika. I'm a part of the team at the archives at NCBS. And we'd like to begin by asking the director, Professor L.S. Shashidhara, to say a few words about NCBS.
Nothing much. So my job is to welcome you all. Those who are within the campus, of course, welcome to this lecture, and also those who have come from outside, welcome to our campus, and also to the first of the 3 lecture series of Samira here today. Those who have come for the first time, NCBS is a full form of NCBS, National Center for Biological Sciences. As the name indicates, is a research institution, working in the area of biological sciences. Then you may ask, why is this lecture here? But in addition to doing research in the area of biological sciences, we actually look at biology as not just something, a word biology in the textbook. It is all about life. When we say all about life, it's also about human life. And human life connects to how we connect to the outside world, in addition to how we connect to ourselves, right? So given that the founder of this institution, Obaid Siddiqi, he was very keen that we catalyze a variety of different kinds of activities, in addition to doing high quality research in the area of biological sciences, particularly, connect to history, connect to art, connect to literature, and connect to society at large, and being very conscious of the societal dynamics of the time in which we live. And continuing with this legacy, we have several activities at NCBS beyond our research in what we do in the labs. We have catalyzed institutions. We have catalyzed very different activities like setting up science gallery or helping to set up science gallery. Then we have Bangalore Sustainability Forum. And beyond all of these things, most importantly, in the context of today's gathering, we have a fantastic archives, which will be introduced by Deepika very soon after me. And this archives basically is a collection of material on Indian science in the last 200 years or so, particularly so-called modern science. And that is not simply a collection, it's a place where lots of activities happen around the history of Indian science and its connection to the real life. So with this context, we have instituted Obaid Siddiqi Chair Professorship. This is the 6th one of Samira Sheikh. And so she's going to give her talk based on the work she has done in the last 1 year on our campus. And one of the important things about OS Chair is not about what work they do here, research work, is how they catalyze the way of thinking differently, amongst our students. So her interaction with our students, or in general, with archival, staff and other researchers on campus is very, very important part of our activity. And thank you very much for sparing so much of your valuable time with us in the last 1 year, given all the difficulties you had to face with the visa and other issues, which has become a standard, in India nowadays. So over to Deepika. Welcome to you all again.
The Archives at NCBS is a public collecting center for the history of science in contemporary India. So that means that we actively seek out and preserve material from all fields of science and from across the country. We preserve photos, letters, documents, scientific instruments, and other kinds of artifacts from individual scientists, from organizations, people's movements, and much more. And in the coming year, our focus is on histories of science in the Karnataka region. If you'd like to learn more about us, please do visit the archives website. It's archives.ncbs.res.in. Or please do come over and visit us in person. We love having visitors. We're open Monday to Friday, 10:30 a.m. to 5. I'm here with several of my fantastic colleagues from the archives, and I'd like to ask you to raise your hand so that people can find you after the talk. If anyone would like a tour of the archives, I'd like to invite people afterwards to visit the archives, have a tour. There's a really lovely exhibition on conservation. So whether you work at an archive or whether you simply want to know what to do with your grandmother's photographs, please do visit the exhibition, and there's something in it for everyone. I'd also like to tell you, I know Shashi covered this a little, but I'd like to tell you a little about the position of the Obaid Siddiqi Chair. It is, of course, named after Obaid Siddiqi, the renowned biologist whose sustained vision led to the development and the founding of NCBS. The chair is supported by TNQ Foundation, And every year, the chair is awarded to a distinguished scholar with a substantial body of work that deepens our understanding of the history and culture of science. They are known for transcending disciplinary boundaries in their work and engaging with the public. They also work closely with the archives at NCBS to reimagine the role of the archive in both academic and public spaces. Today's talk, The Mughal Map Mystery, is the first in a series of 3 lectures titled No Country for Old Maps. The second will be held at the National Law School, Thursday the 16th, same time, 5 p.m. high tea, and 5:30 the talk begins. And the same timings apply to the final talk at BIC, which is on the 19th. We really hope you will join us for the remaining 2 talks in the series. And I'll hand over to Professor Shashi Thudupalli, a member of faculty at NCBS, to tell you more about Samira and her work.
Thank you, Deepika. Well, it's a pleasure to introduce Samira. I have a written introduction in front of me because my brain is full of diffusion limited aggregation, something that I'm working on, and that's not what you want to hear about. So it's a pleasure to be introducing Samira to you, who's an associate professor of history at Vanderbilt University. And for the past year, she has been the 5th holder of the Obaid Siddiqi chair at NCBS. Samira's work has long been concerned with histories, as she calls it, that emerge from below and from the margins. And specifically, a significant part of her work has focused on Gujarat from the 15th to the 18th centuries, asking how regions are made through people's movements, languages, and memories. And her scholarship specifically has returned to the question of how large political and cultural formations are built from the ground up. At NCBS, Samira has really nucleated, as Shashi said, also a wide range of activities that relate both to NCBS as well as her own research. So she developed and was leading a series of interactions called the Historian in the House, bringing in the NCBS community and the wider public into conversations about epics, animals, oceans, land, power, and evidence. And she also introduced Fragments from the Archives, a series that drew material from the archives and discussed that with various colleagues. And I myself was a part of that, bringing a fragment from the research associated with Jivanu into the discussion. Earlier this year, she organized a 2-day workshop, Lines of Power, discussing mapping, measurement, and the making of Indian spaces. The Obaid Siddiqui lectures that she's going to give bring together various of these strands: Gujarat, maps, science, archives, and the histories of knowledge. And with that, I'm looking very much forward, Samira, to your first lecture in this series.
Okay, I do have a script, although let's see how far I wander. It's wonderful to be here among all of you and to be giving the first of my lectures named for Obaid Siddiqi. It's an honor. It's also been a great privilege in this past year to spend the last year on this beautiful campus. And if it's your first time here, please do take a look around when this talk is done. I spent it in close conversation with the archives at NCBS, and in particular with the archivists at NCBS, and with many members of the larger NCBS community. And I feel myself really transformed by the experience that I have had and that you all have given me over the year. I've been relying on the labor of archivists for my entire career as a historian. And I think the first time I stepped into an archive was probably in the 90s, long before many people in this room were even born. But I'm ashamed to say that until this past year, I haven't really understood what it is to be an archivist. You can't bullshit archivists. They literally know where the bodies are buried. They've handled the papers, they've peered at the letters, and they've figured out how to classify and label them. And they are incredibly discreet as well. So I don't know those secrets either. They've peeled off tape from crumbling documents and carefully housed them in acid-free paper. And I do recommend looking at that wonderful exhibition on conservation downstairs, curated by Sindhu and her team. It's often said of India that we disrespect our past, but that's not true here. When you run into archivists at the Acad canteen, they seem to be caring for the past, and that is, of course, part of what they do. But more importantly, what they do is preserving our history for the future. And so, for this first lecture, I'm going to talk about what it means to reassemble an archive that has been dispersed. Shashi very kindly said that part of my work has been on Gujarat, and I'm going to drag you, kicking and screaming, if necessary, to Gujarat. Of course, why wouldn't you go to Gujarat? It is the land of the Statue of Unity and many other things besides. But the reason I'm taking you on this journey is because I want you to think about the route that this Google Maps image marks. Most of us encounter maps nowadays in very utilitarian ways. We encounter them because we need to get from one place to another. And so what we do is we express the world into lines, estimated times of arrival, and a few named stops along the way. So I'm going to ask you, now that we've reached Gujarat, to take a look at this and take a moment to try and orient yourself with respect to the image that you see here. I would suspect that many of you are struggling to see what kind of map is this? You're trying to figure out with the shapes and forms that we usually associate with a map. You may be struggling to identify the coastline, the compass rose or a north arrow, a grid, the few colors that usually modern maps are associated with. You might be trying to rotate it or twist it in order to actually fit with your conception of a map. And just sit with that discomfort for a second. We've become so used to viewing and interpreting the space through a very specific cartographic language. And yes, that is a language that we have learned and we have become accustomed to, that we often feel very disoriented from an image like this. We are used to seeing north at the top. We're used to seeing very flat projection. We're used to seeing a grid with coordinates, a controlled color palette, and the promise, at least, of some direct connection, direct correlation with the land that the map purports to describe. Here is another view of the same map, and you see here Sindhu Raj, conservator here at NCBS, and you get a sense of the scale of this object that I'm going to be spending the next few minutes talking about. The map was made in about 1750. It is a time when Gujarat was still ruled by the Mughals. This is obviously not a map that you just glance at on your phone. It requires bodily movement from you. It requires a different kind of attention from you. It requires you to move around, to look closely at details, and then zoom out, as it were. And here what I've tried to do is to help you orient yourself with the modern map of Gujarat, and to try and see what parts of the map correspond with what we now think of as the correct outlines of Gujarat and where it diverges. And that's going to be something we will dig into even further. But the problem is that if I put north on top, if I add this kind of modern outline of Gujarat, you will feel a greater sense of recognition. You will associate it with the map that you, have probably seen since your school days. But it also introduces modern questions into how to interpret the older map. And that question, the first question often will be, why is this old map inaccurate? Why does it not match with the outlines of the modern map that we're looking at? Was it that Indians didn't know how to survey, didn't know how to calculate, didn't know how to draw maps accurately? And I'm going to try and dig into those questions and try and answer them by way of this today's conversation. And I want to encourage you to, instead of looking at the old map as a failure, I want to find ways of entering the geography that it describes and the geography that it generates for the audience that it was expecting in its day. I think this is a good moment, and I should say, yes, that the territory that the map describes is roughly what you see in red over here. It includes from north to south, from Ajmer to Diu, it encompasses a distance of about 750 kilometers, and from east to west, about 475 kilometers. So what you're seeing here is a map that, from our modern day terms, has been sort of compressed and twisted into creating what you just saw. And it's maybe a good moment to remember that all maps are representations. Your Google map might get you from A to B, but there is a lot about its geography, about the geography of the path that you take, that is going to exclude. There are decisions taken by map makers to include certain aspects and to exclude the majority. So what you see is a very attenuated kind of map on your phone, whereas this is a map that heaps on the kinds of features that create responses in you, whether those are responses of awe, of admiration, or of affect. And here I think Lewis Carroll reminds us that there is really no such thing as a one-to-one correspondence between any map and the real features of the earth. So let's take a look at this map again. I'm going to try and orient you a little bit. This is Gujarat around 1750, at a time when the Mughal control over Gujarat was almost gone. The Marathas were literally at the door. Here you see that the central part of the map, way out of what we would call modern day scale, is the city of Ahmedabad. It kind of looms out of the center of the map. You see that the Gulf of Cambay is very depicted with a lot of care, as is the Sabarmati river that opens out into the Gulf of Cambay. And you'll also see that the river Sabarmati is depicted quite thickly. And again, this points to the fact that both Ahmedabad and its river are given great importance by virtue of size within this map. You see here the mountain of Girnar, which is very close to the Gir sanctuary of where lions are famously found. You see Diu, and here I've kind of turned the map so that north is on top again. And here you see the entire Saurashtra or Kathiawar Peninsula, where, which again I've placed with east on top, and you see Kutch towards the northwest. So this map includes all parts of Gujarat, but in different scales, in different genres, in different modes of both making and expected viewing. So rather than judging the accuracy of this map with respect to modern maps, which I hope I've suggested at least, are also just representations, what I propose to do is that we start by trying to understand the geographic frame that the map creates, the world that the authors tried to make. Now the question arises, what have I been doing over the past several months? And I have to say, I have spent a lot of time staring at this map. I've been staring at this map, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But one of the things I've tried to do is there a way of making the analysis of maps like this, maps that are not Cartesians, shall we say, that are not on a grid, that do not have a coordinate system, is there a more rigorous and systematic way of approaching such maps, which does not kind of judge them as being inaccurate, but rather, as I'm suggesting, to try to see what kind of geographic system they arise out of and what kind of possibilities they offer. What are ways to avoid being presentist in our analysis of maps such as this? You can see, and I will show you more details in a second, that this map treats different parts of Gujarat differently. The Ahmedabad city is painted like a city map, or like a city plan, as though from a bird's eye view. The other parts are painted with greater attention to botany, to topography, to the hills, to the seashore. And there is a range of genres that has gone into making this particular map that I'm going to try and unpack for you. Now, it's clearly not a travel map. It's not going to help you a lot to get from A to B. It's not going to help you navigate accurately from Ahmedabad, say, to Kutch. There isn't very much by way of direction information within this map. What there is also not a survey map. So maps that were made by governments to survey land parcels, to associate those land parcels with their owners or their tenants, this map makes no attempt to do that. So what kind of map is it? And with that question in mind, I have tried to develop a slightly more systematic way to try and approach maps such as this. And that is what I call an annotation and analytical stack. Don't waste your time on, going through all 14 layers of this stack. I'll illustrate a couple of them. I'm getting this ready for publication. But what the effort is to try and do is to see whether I can ask questions of the map that help explicate what it is actually trying to do. Firstly, what kind of map is it? Is it a route map, a pilgrimage map, a survey map, a physical features map? What does it name and in what language? How does it picture space? How does it organize space and routes? How does it treat biology? How does it treat the creatures and the beings and the flora and the fauna of the territory that it describes? How does it treat sacred sites? What political or administrative information does it include? And can we subject such maps to technical analysis, and what might those tell us about the questions that I'm trying to ask? Where are, and this is perhaps the last question that I've had to phrase very carefully, where is the data in the map confident? And where does that confidence fray or get thinner? So let's look at some examples of these layers, which are also sort of analytical examples. There are 700 plus individual plants that have been painted in this map. And Taksh Sangwan, who's been working with me, has labeled each one of them. I had a wonderful session with some of your colleagues to try and identify some of the plants that are painted in this map, and I'm very grateful to them. You see riparian plants, you see grasses and sedges, you see palms, you see ailanthus, you see different kinds of leaves, different kinds of canopies, different kind of leaf directions. You see different kinds of landscapes within which plants are placed. In this landscape, you start to see that these are more, wetter landscape plants. And you see the grasslands within which there were elephants in the 18th century in the eastern parts of Gujarat. This is a people, and there are several other examples very carefully delineated of botanical details. You also have very interesting attention to fauna. There are 3 delightful cheetahs painted in the map, the elephants that I just showed you, cattle which thrive on a particular island in the Gulf of Cambay, bullocks which were a prized commercial category. Bullocks from Kankrej are still famous. Horses, again, an important commercial commodity, and the horsemen who rode them, the Kathi community. Peacocks, and there are others as well. There's more. One of the most interesting features of this map is its attention to hydrology, and I have to thank my friend Sachin Tiwari, if he's here, for really drawing my attention to the hydrological features of this map. So here again, we've got an example of all the hydrological features that have been carefully marked. You see not just the coastal, the marine territories, but you also see every single well, step well, tank, lake, all sorts of irrigation features. All of those have been very carefully painted. And they have been placed in the vicinity of towns, so you get a sense of what the sort of irrigation infrastructure for a town might look like. This is a helical well, very common in Gujarat and parts of Rajasthan, which kind of a spiral-shaped step well. A lot of attention to the sea, where you see sea creatures and a lot of boats. This is one of my favorites, a sawfish, which is now critically endangered. You see this delightful seahorse and many others. You could spend hours looking at the fish in the sea and the rivers. The map also pays attention to administration, and it does so in a variety of registers, which include pointing out which are the big cities, which are the parganas. Pargana is a revenue unit under the Mughals. It continued to be used under the British period. Villages, forts, ports, natural features, and so on. And this annotated layer gives you really a sense of how dense that information is about how Gujarat was administered. You see attention given to different cities and their gates. Note that gates were important because you passed in in and out through gates, and you had to pay a tax to enter a town and to exit a town if you were a merchant. So gates are very important, and you see the different ways in which cities are depicted. This is Cambay depicted as a city plan, and you also get a sense of how different landscapes are depicted differently. So Girnar is depicted not from the bird's eye view, but as a traveler or a pilgrim might approach it, whereas Junagadh, the city next to it, is once again a kind of bird's eye planar view. The city of Patan, again a different visual language, which has a bunch of roads within it to describe the buildings within it and what is going on. The ports, bandars, are carefully marked all along the coast. And also I should have said that the language is both Persian and Devanagari and Gujarati in Devanagari script. There is a lot of attention to religion. And here the interesting thing is that there are Hindu, Muslim, and Jain sites, and they are all depicted. The most prominent are Hindu sites, but that doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of Muslim sites are also depicted. We're trying to identify all of them, but it's going to take a while. And what you see on the top left is the shrine, which is the largest religious structure in this entire map, and that is the temple of the goddess Bahuchara, who rides on a chicken and who is the patron goddess of the Hijra community. Sources of information. Now, one little temple image was intriguing me for the longest time. And then you see the temple has a little bird sitting on top on the flagpole. And if that information is corroborated by a great gazetteer of Gujarat written in the 18th century, which says that every monsoon there were birds, little birds, that would come to the temple and then die on the spot. And the arrival of these birds heralded the rainy season. So they were, in an important way, this kind of folklore is also folded into the map. So the sources for the map are not just kind of clinical data on towns and fiscal information, but there's also folklore in here. And you see that birds such as this distressed tern are still ending up near Madhavpur and kind of indicate that the southwest monsoon is on its way. You see also that the island of Bet Dwarka, which is depicted in the Harivamsha and in the Puranas as being the shape of a conch, is actually painted in the shape of a conch here. And that, again, it evokes the religious connotations of that place. So that's, again, you have the source is the sort of religious depiction, description of that place of worship. One of the things that I consider most important about this map is that it is intended to provoke reactions in us, to provoke affect, to provoke pleasure, or awe, or admiration. So let's see if it has that effect on you. Now the way Girnar is painted over here, take a look. Again, it is as though you were a pilgrim approaching this sacred mountain, and this is a mountain sacred to Hindus, Muslims, and Jains. And we've been able to identify some of these structures, which are both Jain temples, a goddess temple at the top, and a dargah. So you would approach the mountain of Girnar. There would be places for you to get water. This puzzled me for a very long time. Why is there a tiger in a place associated with lions? Any thoughts, any guesses as to why there might be a tiger? Yes, yes. It's because there's a goddess temple there and her mount is the tiger. And so this indicates the proximity to the goddess temple. And up here, again for the longest time, I thought this was a cow. But it's actually, and again the Mirate-Ahmadi, the gazetteer of Gujarat, tells us that there was a rock formation on the top of the mountain from which water gushed out, and that rock formation was in the shape of a cow's head. So it's a Gaumukh water spout. So it's not an actual cow. This is an indication of a religious spot. When you are climbing the Girnar mountain, you're going to get hot and sweaty, but also you're going to get relief from the plains because you're going to a higher altitude. And meanwhile, you also get to enjoy the plants and the flowers that bedeck the mountain. So your path as a pilgrim along the mountain, across the mountain, up to the summit of the mountain is marked by multiple places in which the author is evoking, the map maker is evoking the joy of climbing the mountain, but also giving you an opportunity to recall the pilgrimage you might have made in the past. So you have this sense of, oh yes, I remember that little temple. I remember that flower that I saw there. So there is this powerful affective layer that is in part of the map. The map is also rich in information. As I've said, you saw the hundreds and hundreds of points that Taksh has marked out. And here's where the interesting thing lies. So this is a heat map of the density of information within this map. This area marks where the information density is at its highest. There are the greatest number of points in the yellow areas. The lowest number of points are in the purple areas. But there's a paradox here. Because this area, the area between Ahmedabad and the Gulf of Cambay, is actually where the confidence in mapping is the greatest. This is an area that was clearly surveyed. The river has been, the curves of the river, the sinuosity of the river has been depicted with a great deal of fidelity. And there is clearly a lot of information that went into creating this part. But there are much fewer points of reference there. And the inference here is, because this area was so well known, it didn't have to be labeled so thoroughly. The bordering areas which are much less well known are the ones for which information needed to be collected, and so those tend to be the ones that have the highest density of information. So back in March, with the very gracious support of NCBS, I was able to assemble an incredible team of conservators, of a textile historian, an art historian, Professor Deepthi Khera, and we all went to Baroda together to examine this map and to subject it to multiple forms of imaging and testing. All of those were non-invasive. We weren't able to take any samples, but we are still able to do a lot on the basis of 6 hours of work that we were granted on this giant map. So let me share some of the results with you. The most important place in which the results have really changed how we think about, how I think about this map, is the information that it has provided on pigments and colors that are used in the map. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples which comprise what I'm calling the chromatic layer. And I'm arguing that the chromatic layer actually allows us to come to some hypothesis about color being used as a system, not just sort of random colors being used for random things, but that there was some sort of correspondence between the colors chosen to depict certain parts of the map and how that was actually played out. We found a number of pigments. In this case, you see that a turtle has been made kind of silvery with the application of tin. So one of the most striking things is that all the water bodies in the map, all the blue in the map is indigo. And now this is not indigo used as dye, which saturates the cloth. It is indigo used as paint, applied with a brush. But that has enabled my colleague Dhaval to create this rendering which basically identifies all the hydrology of the map in this very effective way, because all of that, what you see, is painted in indigo. So that's quite a dramatic correspondence, as it were, between indigo and water that is being made over here. It's interesting. I mean, they could have used other blues. There were a lot of other blues available in the market, not necessarily very expensive, but the only blue used in the map is indigo. Also, interestingly, there is no green pigment used in the map. Green is always created by mixing indigo with orbiment, which is a arsenic-based mineral, and which gives you yellow and which is bright yellow, and yellow and blue gives you the greens in the map. You also see that the mountains in the map are painted with a lot of reference to Indian painting traditions that you would see in both Mughal, Rajasthani, and other genres of painting. You see that there is a lot of attention given in this painting to hillocks being of different colors. And again, this is not something I had given a lot of thought to until, again, Taksh found that the darkest brown areas of the map correspond to where Deccan basalt is found. So there is some interest in geology that the makers of the map are employing over here, using this very dark brown color to represent certain kinds of rock, especially in the case of basalt. We don't yet know what the pinks and the lighter browns refer to, but I wouldn't be surprised if, again, there is some correspondence between the geology and the making of the map. So the next question arises is, having established that this is not a travel map, this is not a survey map, it's not this, it's not that, then what was this map for? I think it was a tourist map. I think it was a map that describes and celebrates the great things of Gujarat. You don't need a very accurate survey-based map to tell you that Gujarat has the Gir forest and has these great temples and so on. All you need is that the general features are recognizable, and they provoke some sense of wanting to go to Gujarat within you. I told you this was an ad for Gujarat tourism. So that's my hypothesis, that this functions in a way very much akin to a tourist map. But a tourist map for whom? And for what purpose? Why would somebody want this elaborate, extremely expensive, extremely complex tourist map in 1750? And that, in order to answer that, I've got to go back to talking about what were Mughal forms of mapping, what is this dispersed archive of Mughal maps that I started with, and how are we going to find it? During the reign of Babur, very keen on gardens, you see that they're using a grid in order to plan a garden. One of the biographies of Vasco da Gama says that the sailor from Gujarat who guided Vasco across the sea used maps that were like the maps of the Arabs and were made on grids. We know that Jahangir loved maps and loved globes. Famously, when Sir Thomas Roe gave him a copy of Mercator's Atlas, he had his scholars at his court take a look at it, and then he said, nah, not interesting. But he did love globes. And he uses globes as a gesture of both representing his sovereignty. His name literally means the one who seizes the earth. And so standing on top of a globe is a very powerful symbol of his sovereignty. During the period of Shah Jahan, although there's no clear indication of patronage, there was an important atlas made in a very old style, in a very archaic style of Islamic mapping, which placed, however, India at the center of the map of the world. But there's no evidence that Shah Jahan even knew about it. And then we have a whole bunch of genres of mapping that were being practiced at the time, but not necessarily having anything to do with the actual Mughal court. Mapping was going on, it was just not sponsored out of the court. Here you see a Maratha map of the fort of Vijaydurg. Here you see a wonderful map of the Sangam, a hydrological map of the confluence of the Bhima and the Neera rivers. Here you see a fort map of Sanganer. You see an incredible route map of the journey, or the entire northwestern part of South Asia, including Kabul and extending almost to Rajasthan. This is a giant map of Agra Fort that is in the City Palace Museum in Jaipur. I'm just going to run through a few more. This is an amazing 40-foot long map of the Shah Jahanabad Canal that's in Hyderabad. This is one of the oldest maps in the collection from the 1680s, which is in the City Palace Museum, and it's a route map of the area between Ajmer and Ahmedabad. And you see the routes and the distances being carefully marked over here. There are a number of maritime maps from the coast of Gujarat, the Konkan, Malabar, and here I rely very much on the work of the late Professor B. Arunachalam. There are maps that are made as cosmologies. There are a number of instruments that were used, such as this, to calculate both latitude and time, but also there were longitude charts, and this is something I'm trying to figure out. And so when we talk about reconstituting this archive of Mughal maps, I'm going to rephrase that at the end of this talk. It's not reconstituting an archive of Mughal maps as such, because that's relatively thin. Maybe we can say Mughal era maps, or I would prefer early modern maps and mappings. And if we go out to look just for maps in ways that we recognize as maps, then we're going to find relatively few. If we open the category of maps to include maps that are paintings, maps that are textile, maps that are sometimes verbal or in the form of written directions, maps that are diagrams or charts, maps that are tables of revenue calculations. There is a whole world of mappings out there, but we just have to recognize that India's specificity, its specific history, gives rise to a very specific range of mappings that are available. And so let's look, instead of looking just for maps that look like a kind of sepia tinted version of a road atlas, we've got to widen our scope and look for different kinds of mappings. And then we find they're all around us. Even if we stick to maps in the database that I have created, there are over 500 maps between 1650 and 1800 that are just from northern and western India. I haven't even searched in the south and the east. So there's a lot of maps, but I think we should open our eyes and our attention and our ears to the multiple kinds of mappings that were practiced and were available and haven't disappeared. They're still around us. Okay, to sum up, in my next talk on next Thursday at the National Law School, I'm going to turn to what happens when the archive of all these mappings is devalued and forgotten. And only one genre of mapping, European style mapping, is given the category or the title of map. What happens when we are distanced and we devalue the other forms of mapping that are not just were among us, but are still, I would argue, very much amongst us? The 18th century saw a huge expansion of mapping in India as Mughal power receded and new patrons used maps and mappings to make sense of the new political allegiances, the claims to land, the routes that were coming up. But later histories have only allowed one genre of mapping to count. Today, I've tried to show what happens when we try to reconstitute the archive of early modern mapping with the help of one particular map. And there's so much more to still be done on that one map. But next week, I'll try and show the effects and the damage of the dispersal that took place in the first place. Let's return to Dasheri. Here at NCBS, you've hosted and cultivated an archive for stories to be told that, sure enough, store the dominant narratives of the history of Indian science, but also push against them. You've got the papers of the great heroes of modern science and some of its heroines, but you've also got stories of public science, of environmental stewardship, and of solidarity in the face of the groundswells of willed ignorance that we see around us today. I suspect that when scientific temper, and where's Siddharth? I saw you. When scientific temper is reconstituted in the decades to come, it'll be from NCBS and from the archives at NCBS that work will be done. So I'm grateful to all of you for facilitating that. And finally, since it's World Cup season, my thanks to everyone who's been so incredible. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, could you point out where India is in some sense?
Now, Islamic maps have south on top. So what you've got here is Biladul Hind. Here, this is the Indian peninsula, and that's Sri Lanka.
So the island off the western coast of India is what?
I'll have to get back to you on that. Because this image is not clear enough for me to read it. It might be Socotra, the island in the Red Sea, which is on the way to the. It's not located quite right for that. But I'll get back to you.
Hello, thank you. It was very nice. My question is a little more procedural about the pigments that your team got. So what was the method to get this picture? Was it did they use X-rays or something?
Detailed, beg your pardon?
Did they use X-rays or?
Yeah, we used multispectral imaging, XRF, and microscopic analysis of the actual pigments with the actual surface of the cloth, so that we could actually see how the pigment sort of sits in or is sunk into the cloth. Infrared imaging was very helpful as well to kind of give us a sense of which pigments were used. Certain kinds of pigments were ruled out by that exercise. One major technical difficulty of this whole exercise in spectrography was that the map had been laminated at some point. So there was this, the whole surface of the map is saturated with an adhesive that made it very hard to get sort of reliable results. But the technical report has revealed a lot of very interesting things, and that will be deposited with the archives once it's done. Happy to share that with you as well.
And also, do we know who drew the map?
No. I think it has to be a team of some kind. So we've got, there's no predecessor to this map. There's no map that is exactly like this, painted on cloth on such a large scale. My current working hypothesis is that it's painters who were active in the region around Ahmedabad, who were familiar with the use of indigo and the range of pigments that are used in this map, but who were not necessarily people who made manuscript paintings or what are commonly called miniature paintings. They were comfortable with the use of cloth, but this map seems to be a new experiment and a new genre for them. But currently, that's really all we can say. So.
You touched upon the 18th century map-making efforts of the Mughals. The contemporary neighboring countryside would have had many rulers. What was the level of expertise in those areas? They must have also been, India was quite famous for many things, astronomy and metallurgy and Indic knowledge systems. So what was the level of expertise in all those places, and why only the research on this particular thing, this particular area?
So I'll answer the second question first. I've spent most of my career studying Gujarat, and this is a map. I've had this image of the map that I spent the most time on since 2009. And I've been wanting to subject it to a very detailed study, and that's what I was able to do. A number of maps were produced in 18th century Gujarat, and I'm working on a book on some of those. But the other two neighboring areas, both Rajasthan and the Maratha territories, were also places where a lot of maps were produced. And especially in the 18th century. For reasons of expertise, languages, and so on, I can't be the last word on those maps. So this has to be a common effort. So if anyone wants to study any aspect of early modern maps, I would strongly encourage you to do it. There's lots of scope. But yes, so Savai Jai Singh, the Kachwaha ruler of Jaipur, he was very, very interested in maps and mapping, and it is during his period that the largest number of maps were both commissioned and collected in Jaipur. And those represent a whole range of different kinds of maps and mappings from city plans, town plans, plans of entire territories, and so on. And he was, of course, also very much interested in astronomy, drawing from the classical Islamic astronomy of Ulugh Beg in Samarkand. And so the Jantar Mantar and various other astronomical features were commissioned under his reign. The Marathas, again, are very active in the matter of map making. There are a number of 18th century Maratha maps in both Bombay and Pune. And I'm hoping with colleagues to be able to study those as well. As I said, for South and Eastern India, I don't know. Please go out there and look.
The first one which you showed is actually a panoramic sketch. It's called a sketch, if I'm not wrong, a panoramic sketch. It's not a map as such.
Which one are you talking?
The photographs you showed in the beginning, you were asking what we make of it. Mm-hmm. It's actually a panoramic sketch. It's not a map.
Why would you say it's not a map?
Very good. A map has to have a scale.
Why does it have to have a scale?
For you to read it.
Why does it need to be read only with a scale?
For utilities, a map is made for utility's sake.
Why is the utility of a tourist map determined by scale?
Even a tourist map, you got to know where you're headed, which direction, how many paces, blah, blah, blah. So it's utility oriented.
So here's where I would encourage you to flip that thinking and to try and see what the authors of the map are trying to make and trying to do, and try and reconstruct that. So if we allow ourselves to think that this is a valid form of map making, then we open our eyes to how Indians actually made maps. Because otherwise, the alternative is to say, Indians didn't make maps. And that is completely, that then gets us down the dead end of saying, how did Indians get around? How did Indians find their way? We know they found their way. We know Indians were highly mobile, were highly cognizant of their landscape and the place around them. So I'm inviting you to flip your way of thinking and say scale is not the only way in which map making can be done. That's a very Eurocentric way of seeing maps as only determined by scale.
Hi, first of all, congratulations. This is such lovely work. And like what a beautifully rich world to live in for like an entire year. And there are so many questions about like process. But I think I would like to know like how do you imagine it was exhibited? Like because the scale is so big and it's so beautiful. And you said it's a tourist map, right? So how do you imagine? Where was it? I'm not looking for like a concrete answer because I don't think we might have that. But like I think I would like to know, like, what do you think? Where do you see it?
So, great question, thank you. Another little process rabbit hole that we were able to go down as a result of the technical study. Now the map is, the edges are kind of stitched with a kind of cord. We don't know when that cord was placed. But if you put the map with east on top, then there are little tabs at the top, which suggests that the map would have been hung on a wall with tabs. You see that little tab. So that's one little hint. The other hint is all the writing in the map is legible, both in Persian and in Devanagari is legible if you have east on top. But, there is a but. Why is it that the biggest and most important temple, if east was on top, why is the temple upside down? Yeah? So, imagining how the map was used, I think we have to imagine multiple ways in which it was used. One way could have been hanging from a wall with east on top, where people say, oh my God, how? This is amazing. This is 14 feet by 13 feet. It's gigantic. You need a really large wall to hang it up on. But it could also have been maybe rolled up and part of it displayed on a table or on the floor. It could have been folded, and there are signs of repair throughout at regular intervals through the map, which suggests the map was folded like a sari. And so the corners where it was folded have been worn through. So it may have been that part of the map was unfolded, so that when you opened only part of it, then this could be adjusted so that the temple would be the right way up. And yet another hypothesis is that, and this is something still working out, that there are different zones within the map that pertain to its individual information economies. In other words, the form of making this area around Ahmedabad pertains to city plan making. This pertains to more anecdotal information gathering, because it's not the directly ruled part of Gujarat. Remember, at independence, Gujarat had more than 300 princely states that acceded to the Indian Union. The majority of them were here. So the Mughals never directly ruled them. These were places that gave tribute. So chances are that the commissioner of the map said, you know, send us a map of your town or your village or your kingdom, and we'll put it in the big map. Kutch is very curiously anomalous. It's a whole other conversation, which, like, why is Kutch shown without the Gulf of Kutch? And one thought is that the intertidal areas are depicted as land within this map. But it does have a place where there are salt pans here, and the run is also marked over here. So there is attention given to certain features, but it's clear that the level of information here is much thinner. So again, when you think about how this is all put together, there's different information economies from it which it arises, but we can also imagine different ways in which it would have been displayed because it was so versatile. And it's painted on sort of thin malmal fabric. It's muslin fabric that it was painted on, very thin. It would have been sort of wavy in the breeze.
Thank you.
Hi. Very nice. I was interested in the history of this map itself. Where is it? How did you find it? And so on.
So it's in the Baroda Museum and Picture Gallery. It has never been on display as far as I know. It's too fragile, and efforts were made at some point to conserve it by laminating the whole thing. So it's now kind of thick and crackly and kind of weird. I saw, there's only one publication about it from the 70s by an archaeologist called R.N. Mehta, who dug around and found how it was purchased by the museum in the 30s. And it's been in my mind to investigate it ever since I was doing my PhDs. Then I finally, 2009, went and got it photographed.
So for another map, you also mentioned that it was pretty large area that it covered. Yeah. So is it something of a template? It's common to have these giant maps at that time? Or?
There are, in the City Palace Museum in Jaipur, there are a number of such giant maps comparable in size. There are very large maps, for instance, of Kashmir that were also made. One is in the Library of Congress, one in the British Library. So yeah, painting very large maps of this scale was not unknown. It was being done. But this is so early a stage of investigation that we haven't had a chance to compare systematically with the results from this map. This is all fresh out of the oven, as it were. And so hope to take it forward.
Thanks.
So these maps, I mean, with somewhat more complicated from our perspective, because we were not there at that time. Assuming that it was meant for, the attention of only a few people. Otherwise, there would be key legends or something. Let's say it's meant to explain to a king or a ruler, saying that certain aspect. But many of the political maps, perhaps they were prepared only to explain to certain rulers rather than for general public. But if it is used as a tourist map, want to explain to anybody, it should be more self-explanatory. So, we're just wondering, when it's really maps for ordinary people, started.
So,
is this an example for a map for ordinary people?
Hard to say, because you see, once a map or an artwork is made, it may be intended for a patron and customized for that patron, but later on it may acquire different uses. So there are a couple of clues that would help answer that question. One is that the text, the inscriptions, and there are hundreds of inscriptions of place names, a lot of topographical detail, sometimes directional detail, but the Persian part of it is more detailed and the Gujarati part of it is smaller. And there are signs that the Gujarati might have been added later. So that suggests that even if it was made for the last Mughal governor of Gujarat, which I think is my current hypothesis, later on, since you've already made this huge and beautiful map, you can also add inscriptions which would be then legible to other people as well. Even if the Gujarati and the Persian are put in at the same time, again another working hypothesis, very hard to prove these things, is that now remember this is a time when Gujarat is under siege. The Marathas are threatening to capture Ahmedabad at any time. And we know that the last governor of Gujarat, Ali Muhammad Khan, fled to Cambay after the Marathas captured it in 1754. And so it's from his descendants in Cambay that the museum bought this, this map. But so this map is probably made right when literally the enemy is at the door. So why is he doing this at that time? He's doing it to say, Gujarat is stable, you can invest here, you can come here, nothing is wrong. Everything is lush and there's irrigation, there is water, there's beautiful things. Vibrant Gujarat, there you go. I told you this was an ad for Gujarat. So that's what Ali Muhammad Khan is trying to do. So we have to imagine that even if this is made for only his court, one possibility is that he is hoping Badshah sees it, Shah Alam, Ahmad Shah at that time, or that the various warring clans within Gujarat, including the 300 odd princely states, they see it and they say, oh, I'm part of this. I'm a part of this thing called Gujarat. Jai Jai Garvi Gujarat. You know, this is a Mughal governor of Gujarat saying, this is a great representation of where our common homeland, right? There is a little bit of Udaipur, Ajmer, Jodhpur up top, but the region is very clearly delineated as being Gujarat, and not just Gujarat, but Gujarat, Saurashtra and Kutch, which until 1960 were not reunited until the modern state of Gujarat comes into being.
I have a question here in the back. I was really fascinated by the depictions of trees and the flora and fauna, and the attention to detail that has gone into that. As a person who's looking at this map, how do you know which of this is data and which of this is, say, imagination of the artist that's drawing the maps? Like, there must be some generic trees there that don't look like anything, but we're there just to indicate that there's a forest here or something like that. And going from that to asking, is this a mango tree or a specific kind of grass? How do you make that distinction as a person who studies this map?
I love that question. And for the longest time, I mean, here's where I'm saying being at NCBS has transformed the way I do history. Because for the longest time, I just assumed, hey, generic little vignettes of plants. Maybe one looks like a bit like a mango tree, a bit like a palm tree, but nothing terribly interesting here. It took sitting with Taksh and Sandeep and Kaiko and Anish to actually figure out that we have dozens of varieties here. And those correspond to where those plants are currently found as well. So let's look, for instance, at these plants that are found very close to Ahmedabad. That is still very much characteristic of the arid zone around Ahmedabad. The sedges near the water, and here's where again another colleague suggested that especially for the Ahmedabad area and the Sabarmati River, this map pushes our data back by 300 years. We now have riparian data for going back to 1750 through this map. This borassus palm, still in the area of Cambay, there you still see a lot of borassus palms, and it's not like those are common elsewhere. So this has kind of forced me to really pay attention to the ways in which trees have been depicted, and now using that, now that my eyes have been sensitized to noticing species, I am starting to see that in many other genres, both of maps and with my colleague Deepthi, who's an art historian, of paintings as well. So sometimes a landscape, by just putting a palm there or a banana tree there, will tell you what kind of place is being signified over there. So here's where I'm also suggesting that this is not a random assemblage of information. There is data collection happening in some parts of the map, in some other genres of mapping. The data is thinner, but in some parts it's extremely robust.
Dr. Samira, one last question. Thank you very much. First of all, it did feel like you took us on a time travel journey with you. And the way you structured your talk, it seemed cogent and almost obvious that it has to be a tourism map. What else could it be? Because of the argumentation. I was wondering if you threw around other theories, and at what point in your analysis you eliminated other options that this final map could be. Thank you.
It's a map that's many maps in one. And I think with maps also the interpretation lies in the eyes of the beholder. So if the viewer of the map wants to just look at the Ahmedabad part, and that could be as a result of the viewing practices of seeing, oh, we just need to check the Ahmedabad part, then it's a city map. If the viewer is interested in hydrological data, then it's a hydrological map. Trying to reconstruct the circumstances in which all of these aspects, all of these layers are in one map, but certain things are absent. No boring tax details, no survey details, no fiscal details. This is not a map which is trying to say, this is the amount of tax due to the king. And no route information. This is not a travel map. So those are the two really drastic things missing from it. So it's kind of inferential, and it's a map that's trying to be many things, but I think the sum of the whole is an exercise in propaganda.
A final question, please, and then we can continue this outside.
So because it's such a large map, and you said perhaps multiple people must have worked on it, could you also find out in your detailing using all kinds of spectroscopy method that they were done at different times? Like, for example, Gujarati was added much later, a few years later, and so forth.
I don't think that level of analysis is, that level of detail is possible, especially since it's saturated in laminate.
For example, the people who look at the Renaissance art, many times they do it. It has taken 10 years to, make this painting and so on.
Well, if they let us take samples from the map, we might have different results. But we were not allowed to take even the tiniest sample of fabric or pigment or paint. But we can, there are a few things we can say, which is that there was underpainting. There was a lot of corrections. So drawings were done and then things were corrected after the drawing was made. One interesting place is that in the sea part where you see the ships are made without any underpainting. So the indigo was painted, the sea part was painted, and then the ship was kind of just freehand painted over it. So it was not like those were kind of sketched out beforehand and so on. So some process things we can see.
I was not expecting you to be such a big propagandist for Gujarat, but now you've made that line as well from the past to the present, so I'll have to think about our future collaborations a bit. So, but I was like wanting to put a little bit of pressure on two things as I was hearing you talk about this. One was when you were giving both the stakes in kind of making the historical stakes in making a map like this, the kind of layers of information economies that are there. And then, so to kind of like, sometimes we know that, okay, we don't know what the audience might be, who might see it, like, so you are conjecturing who might be the audience. And so I wonder if, are there any historical sources that come later where they may not have seen this map, but there is some knowledge of this kind of an extravagant exercise that has taken place, or some kind of reading against the grain that there is some gossip circulating that as all of this is cracking, how some big imaginations are going in place. And you may not have found it, but I wonder if that's worth kind of investigating and then kind of reading against the grain. And the other thing, like, I was very taken by that many of the predecessors of the small maps, the route maps, even the map of the world, possibly in Shah Jahan's time, you see that little bit of grid that is there. And since you have alerted us to thinking that what does it mean for where data is consistent? What does it mean where there is density of data? So I wonder, in this kind of propositioning of a place that is there, which is made so dense with affect and detail, are there places where you find that it starts relating to thinking about like making a certain place on a grid versus making another place not on a grid, or having distinctive grids for both, or for various scales for those? Like, is there some kind of collation of maps that have not survived, which can enable us to think in with other maps?
I'm increasingly of the opinion that even if this map doesn't have a visible grid, that parts of it are based on coordinate-based surveying. Not all of it, but parts of it. And that is, again, inferential, because the knowledge of how to calculate your bearings, both latitude and longitude, was available at this point. It was not operationalized into an actual map until the 1780s. That is about 30 to 40 years after this map. So my suspicion is that now to go back to the question you asked in the start of the conversation, is why is there no scale? Now, one of the reasons there is no scale is because in some places there is scale. The way Ahmedabad is depicted, that does have scale. That does have a relationship between actual distances and the way those distances are depicted within the map. In the southeastern part of the map, there is no scale, but there is a relationship of directionality between the places depicted, as in Junagadh is south of Rajkot, for instance, in the map. So lack of scale or variable scale gives you much more flexibility to make the kind of map you want to make. So here we have to think that scale is deployed very deliberately for certain effects and for certain purposes, but is not something that is the universal way in which to depict Gujarat effectively. So then we come to 1782 and the map of Sadanand, which I will talk about next week, which is the first Indian map on grid lines, which is the first Indian map that uses coordinates, and the first Indian map that uses dotted lines to delineate territories. So again, this is a lot of circumstantial information, but I'm fairly sure that Sadanand is aware of this map. Sadanand is also making his map in Cambay only 30 years later. He had to have known this map. And then he turns this cartographic language into something much more what Europeans would be able to understand and recognize as a map. And sir, I think you would also recognize it as a map. So I will look forward to showing that to you next week.
Thanks, everyone. I know there are lots more questions. I'm sorry, Shashi, Colonel Uday, Siddharth. There are loads of questions, but it's 7 p.m., so perhaps we can continue this outside. A quick round of thank yous. Thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you to Samira for this amazing and expansive view of history that you bring to us. Thank you to our funders, TNQ Foundation, for this position and for making these talks possible. To all the coordinating departments at NCBS, security, hospitality, special thanks to instrumentation for always ensuring that archives events go smoothly. And see you at the next lecture on the 16th.